On April 24, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson pressed a button in Washington, and 80,000 light bulbs blazed to life in Lower Manhattan. The Woolworth Building, the tallest structure on Earth, opened to the world. Frank Woolworth had spent $13.5 million in cash to build it, every penny earned selling hairpins and ribbon for a nickel. But here is what the newspapers did not print. The man who lit up the sky was losing his mind. The fortune built on dimes was cracking under the weight of his delusions. And the Cathedral of Commerce he built to force respect from people who would never give it was already becoming his gilded tomb. Chapter 1. The Boy They Would Not Hire. Before Frank Woolworth owned the tallest building in the world, he could not get a job sweeping floors. No 1867, upstate New York. A skinny 15-year-old boy stood outside a dry goods store in Great Bend, rehearsing words in his head. Frank Winfield Woolworth had walked 3 miles from his father's failing farm to ask for work. Any work. Stocking shelves, sweeping sawdust, carrying packages for customers who could afford packages. The merchant looked him over for maybe 10 seconds. "You lack the intelligence for commerce," he said. Frank walked home in silence. The rejection burned differently than the cold or the hunger. Those were facts of poverty you could accept. But this was a judgment on something deeper. The merchant had looked at him and seen nothing. No potential, no future. Just a stammering farm boy who would amount to exactly nothing. He tried again in Watertown, then Carthage, then Rodman. Each merchant delivered the same verdict with different words. Too shy, too awkward, not suited for customers. The problem was not just his poverty. Poor boys got hired all the time. The problem was something in the way he carried himself. Something that made successful men dismiss him on sight. By 1873, Frank was 21 years old and still living on his father's farm, still stammering through conversations, still feeling the weight of those early rejections like stones in his chest. He had developed a nervous habit of running his tongue over his teeth when he spoke, as if checking they were still there. As if something about his own mouth was betraying him. Then William Moore, a merchant in Watertown, made a decision that would accidentally change American retail forever. He hired Frank Woolworth, not because he saw potential, because he needed bodies and Frank would work for free. 3 months without wages, Moore said, to prove himself worthy of employment. Frank took the offer. He swept floors. He learned to wrap packages in brown paper with precise hospital corners. He memorized the price of every item in stock. And slowly, painfully, he taught himself to look customers in the eye. Moore eventually put him on salary, $3.50 a week. Frank saved every penny he did not need for survival. Not because he had a plan, because the fear of being dismissed again, of hearing another merchant tell him he lacked intelligence, was stronger than any desire for comfort. He slept in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and mildew. He ate 1 meal a day, and he studied. He studied how people moved through stores, which displays they touched, which prices made them hesitate. He noticed that women would pick up expensive items, admire them, then put them down with a small sigh. The sigh meant they wanted the thing but could not justify the cost. The sigh was where fortunes hid, but Frank Woolworth was still just a clerk, still stammering, still running his tongue over his teeth, still carrying the wound of those early rejections like a second skeleton beneath his skin. The wound would never heal. It would only grow, feeding on every success, demanding bigger and bigger monuments to prove the merchants wrong. and 35 years later, it would demand a building 792 feet tall, paid for in cash, designed to force respect from people who would never give it. But first, someone had to invent the nickel. Being Chapter 2, the nickel that changed everything. In 1879, a merchant in Watertown tried a radical experiment, and Frank Woolworth saw his future. The experiment was simple. Take all the odds and ends that would not sell at normal prices, pins that had tarnished, ribbon in unpopular colors, soap with chipped edges, pile them on a table, mark everything 5 cents. See what happens. What happened was chaos. Women who had walked past those same items for months suddenly could not resist them. The magic was not in the merchandise. The magic was in the price. 5 cents was low enough to require no justification. No negotiation with a husband. No internal debate about necessity versus desire. 5 cents made wanting and having the same thing. Frank Woolworth watched the 5-cent table empty in hours and understood something the other clerks missed. This was not about selling damaged goods cheap. This was about volume. This was about understanding that 10,000 people spending a nickel generated more profit than 100 people spending $5. The arithmetic was brutal and beautiful. You could get rich selling trash if enough people wanted it. He convinced Moore to let him open a 5-cent store in Utica. Moore agreed to stock it. Frank would keep any profits after expenses. The store failed in 3 months. Not enough foot traffic. Wrong location. Frank absorbed the lesson and tried again. Lancaster, Pennsylvania. February 22nd, 1879. The great 5-cent store opened with a handwritten sign promising everything for a nickel. And Frank had borrowed money, begged credit from suppliers, and filled his tiny storefront with $200 worth of inventory. Pins, needles, thread, dish towels, everything cheap, everything 5 cents. The store made $400 in the first week. Frank stood behind the counter, watching women empty his shelves, and felt something shift in his chest. This was not just profit. This was proof. Proof that the merchants who rejected him were wrong. Proof that intelligence was not what they thought it was. The smart men sold expensive things to rich people and called it commerce. Frank Woolworth would sell cheap things to everyone and call it empire. He opened a second store, then a third. By 1886, he had 7 stores and a new insight. The 5-cent model was perfect, but 10 cents would double his potential inventory. He rebranded 5 and 10-cent stores. The same psychological magic, twice the merchandise. The supply chain was the genius part. Frank went directly to manufacturers. He ordered in massive bulk quantities that let him dictate terms. He paid cash, which meant discounts. He cut out every middleman, every distributor, every layer of markup between factory and customer. Then he hired shopgirls at wages calculated to be just barely survivable and staffed his counters with women who had no choice but to accept his terms. By 1890, he had 25 stores. By 1800, over 50, and every single one was printing money. The arithmetic was simple. A shop girl earned $6 a week for 60 hours of standing behind a counter. She sold maybe $800 worth of merchandise in that time. After cost of goods, rent, and her wages, each girl generated roughly $30 a week in pure profit. Multiply by 60,000 shop girls, and Frank Woolworth was extracting almost $2 million a year from their labor. He bought a mansion, then a bigger mansion. He started collecting art, hiring tutors to teach him which paintings rich people were supposed to admire. He bought custom suits and had his shirts made in London, and learned to order wine in French even though the words felt wrong in his mouth. But the men who mattered still would not shake his hand. The problem was not his wealth. New York had plenty of new money. The problem was how he made it. Shopkeeper money, nickel money, a money that smelled like crowded stores and desperate women buying hairpins they could barely afford. Old money did not build fortunes selling ribbon. Old money built railroads and banks and steel mills. Old money dealt in millions, not nickels. Frank Woolworth was worth millions. But the nickels still clung to him like a stain, so he made a decision. He would build something so magnificent, so impossibly expensive, so far beyond what any shopkeeper should be able to afford, that respect would no longer be optional. He would build the tallest building in the world, and he would pay for it in cash. Chapter 3. The dinner where he was not welcome. By 1900, Frank Woolworth was worth millions, but the men who mattered still would not shake his hand. The invitations came. They always came. Charity galas, museum fundraisers, society dinners where new money was tolerated because new money wrote checks. Frank attended them all, his wife Jenny beside him in gowns that cost more than his shopgirls earned in a year. He smiled, he made small talk, he donated generously, and he watched the way old money looked at him. The look was not hostile. Hostility would have been easier to bear. The look was worse. It was pleasant, polite, perfectly calibrated to include him in the room while excluding him from the conversation. He was acknowledged the way you acknowledge furniture, present, functional, ultimately unimportant. There was a particular dinner in 1902 that Frank would never forget. The Union Club. Dark wood paneling and oil paintings of men whose wealth came from land grants and shipping monopolies. Frank had been invited because he donated $10,000 to something, a hospital maybe, or a library. The cause did not matter. The invitation was what mattered. He sat at a table with men who owned railroads. The conversation turned to architecture. Someone mentioned the new buildings going up in Lower Manhattan, steel frame construction pushing past 20 stories. One of the railroad men said something about height being vulgar. Another agreed. Buildings should have proportion, he said. Dignity. Not this American obsession with being taller than everyone else. Frank mentioned that he was considering a building project himself. The railroad man smiled. For your stores, I imagine. Something practical. The word practical landed like a slap. Frank went home that night and could not sleep. He paced his mansion. He walked from room to room, touching expensive things that did not make him feel any different. The furniture was museum quality. The paintings were authenticated. The wine cellar held bottles worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. None of it mattered. He was still the boy the merchants would not hire, still stammering inside even when his words came out smooth, still running his tongue over his teeth, checking for some invisible defect that made successful men dismiss him. But there was one thing old money could not dismiss: height. You could argue about taste. You could claim wealth earned from shopkeeping was vulgar, but you could not argue with elevation. The tallest building in the world was a fact. A measurable, undeniable fact. And if Frank Woolworth built it, if he paid for it with cash, if he made it so beautiful that even the men who hated how he earned his money had to admit its magnificence, then respect would no longer be optional. It would be mandatory. He started collecting architecture books. He hired researchers to document every tall building in the world. He studied the Flatiron Building, the Singer Building, the Metropolitan Life Tower. He learned about steel frame construction, curtain walls, foundation engineering. He sketched towers in the margins of business documents. Tall, narrow towers that pierce the sky like cathedrals. That word kept appearing in his notes. Cathedral. Not because Frank Woolworth was religious. He attended church the way he attended society dinners, fulfilling an obligation without feeling anything. But cathedrals had something he wanted. They had permanence. They had grandeur. They commanded awe, whether you wanted to give it or not, and they made small men feel smaller. By 1910, Frank had found his architect and his site and his purpose. He would build a 60-story tower in Lower Manhattan. It would be the tallest building on Earth. It would cost $13.5 million, and he would pay every penny in cash, just to prove he could. The building would have marble lobbies and vaulted ceilings and bronze fittings modeled after European cathedrals. It would have his name carved in stone letters 10 feet tall. It would have private offices on the 24th floor where he could sit surrounded by luxury and look down on the entire city. It would force respect from people who would never give it. Or it would prove that no amount of marble could fill the void where acceptance should be. But Frank Woolworth did not think about that possibility. He could not afford to. Chapter 4. The Women Who Paid for the Tower. While Frank sketched his cathedral, 60,000 women stood behind counters earning $6 a week for 60-hour shifts. Her name was Sadie Frown. She was 16 years old. She worked the ribbon counter at the Woolworth store on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, and she had been standing for 11 hours when the customer asked to see the blue silk. Not that blue, the other blue. Sadie pulled down 7 different spools of blue ribbon. The customer touched each one, frowned, said, "Never mind," and walked away. Sadie returned the spools to their exact positions on the shelf. She had been written up twice already for ribbon displays that were not perfectly aligned, and one more infraction and she would lose a day's wages. $6 a week, 72 cents a day, 12 cents an hour. The arithmetic was calculated with precision. Frank Woolworth's efficiency experts had determined the minimum amount a woman could survive on in New York City. Rent for a shared room in a tenement, $2 a week. Food, $3 if she ate mostly bread and potatoes. That left $1 for everything else. Soap, stockings, shoe repair, doctor visits if she got sick, which she could not afford, which meant she worked while sick. The system required her to stay just barely alive. If wages were any lower, shopgirls would starve or turn to prostitution, which created bad publicity. If wages were any higher, they might save money, which reduced their desperation, which meant they might quit. $6 a week kept them trapped in perfect equilibrium. Desperate enough to accept any conditions. Alive enough to keep working. Sadie lived in a tenement on the Lower East Side with 4 other shopgirls. They shared 2 beds. The ones on day shift slept at night. The ones on night shift slept during the day. The room smelled like unwashed bodies and the garlic from the family next door and the open sewer in the courtyard. She had been told she was lucky to have the job. 60,000 women worked in Woolworth stores by 1912. They worked 60-hour weeks, 6 10-hour shifts, standing, always standing. The stores had a rule against sitting. Sitting looked lazy to customers. Sitting suggested the shopgirl was tired, which implied she was weak, which meant she might need better conditions. So they stood. And while they stood, Frank Woolworth's fortune grew. The math was simple and brutal. Each shopgirl sold approximately $800 worth of merchandise per week. Cost of goods was about half that. Rent, utilities, and maintenance took another piece. But after all expenses, each shopgirl generated roughly $30 a week in profit. Multiply that by 60,000 shopgirls, and Frank Woolworth was extracting $1,800,000 a year in pure profit from their labor. Over 7 years of construction, that was $12,600,000, almost exactly the cost of the Woolworth building. The building was not paid for by nickels and dimes. It was paid for by the gap between what those women earned and what their labor generated. It was paid for by Sadie Frown, standing for 11 hours on swollen feet, pulling down ribbon for customers who never bought anything, going home to a bed she shared with a stranger, eating potatoes for dinner because meat cost too much. The shopgirls knew this. In 1912, while the Woolworth building rose toward the sky, the shopgirls tried to organize. They wanted 8-hour shifts. They wanted 1 day off per week. They wanted chairs, just chairs. Something to sit on during the brief moments between customers. Frank Woolworth's response was immediate and absolute. Any shopgirl caught talking to union organizers would be fired. Any store where workers attempted to organize would be closed. He had 60,000 women working for him. He could replace every single one in a week. There were always more desperate women. Always more immigrants who spoke broken English and needed work. Always more Sadie Frowns willing to stand for 60 hours if it meant not starving. The strike collapsed in 6 days. Sadie went back to her ribbon counter. She stood for 60 hours a week. She earned her $6. She survived. And 7 blocks south, the Woolworth building continued rising, 1 floor at a time, built on the arithmetic of her exhaustion. The building would have a marble lobby modeled after European cathedrals. It would have bronze elevator doors etched with intricate designs. It would have a swimming pool in the basement and a private office for Frank Woolworth, paneled in wood from Napoleon's palace. It would not have chairs for shopgirls, because chairs cost money, and Frank Woolworth had already allocated every penny. $13.5 million paid in cash. Every cent extracted from women who would never see the inside of his cathedral. Women who would stand behind counters until their feet went numb and their backs gave out, and they were replaced by younger women who were even more desperate. The efficiency experts had calculated something else, too. The average shopgirl lasted 3 years before her body broke down. 3 years of 60-hour weeks. 3 years of standing. 3 years of generating $30 a week in profit while earning $6. Then she was gone, replaced, forgotten, and the building rose higher. Chapter 5. When the architect met the madman. Cass Gilbert thought he was designing a skyscraper, but Frank Woolworth was building a fortress against his own thoughts. The meeting happened in December of 1910. Cass Gilbert was already famous. He had designed the Minnesota State Capitol, the Supreme Court building, landmarks that combined classical beauty with modern engineering. He understood how to make buildings that commanded respect. Frank Woolworth wanted something different. "I want it to look like a cathedral," Frank said. Gilbert nodded. Gothic revival was fashionable. Pointed arches, decorative tracery, the suggestion of medieval grandeur applied to modern commerce. He could do that. "Not look like," Frank corrected. "Be." He spread drawings across the table, sketches he had made himself, crude but obsessive. Towers within towers, hidden passages, private staircases. rooms with no apparent purpose. Gilbert studied them and realized something unsettling. These were not the drawings of a client with aesthetic preferences. These were the drawings of a man building a psychological fortress. Frank wanted a private elevator that went directly to his office without stopping at any other floor. He wanted his office suite to have multiple exits. He wanted mirrors positioned so he could see anyone approaching from any direction. He wanted walls thick enough that conversations could not be overheard. For security, Frank said. But Gilbert had designed buildings for wealthy men before. Security meant guards and locks. This was something else. This was paranoia given architectural form. The construction began in 1911, and Frank Woolworth began to unravel. He visited the site every day, sometimes twice a day. He would arrive unannounced and demand changes. A corridor needed to be 3 feet wider. A staircase needed to curve differently. A window needed to be moved. Gilbert tried to explain that structural steel did not allow for casual changes. You could not just move a column because it felt wrong. Frank did not care about structural steel. "Fix it," he would say, and walk away. The construction workers started calling him the Ghost. He would appear silently behind them, studying their work, running his hand over surfaces, checking joints and welds and mortar. He never spoke to them directly. He would find the foreman and deliver a list of defects, real and imagined, then disappear. Gilbert scheduled regular meetings to review progress. Frank attended maybe half. The ones he missed, he was usually in his dentist's office. The dental obsession had started years earlier, but by 1912, it was consuming him. He was convinced his teeth were poisoning his system. He had already had several healthy teeth pulled based on this conviction. His dentist kept telling him there was nothing wrong. Frank kept insisting there was. He had a private dentist's office installed in the Woolworth building. Gilbert discovered this when reviewing the plans for the 24th floor. There was a room marked as storage. When Gilbert asked about it, Frank admitted it was for dental equipment. He needed immediate access to dental care at all times. The pain was unpredictable. The poison in his teeth could strike at any moment. Gilbert did not know what to say. The building rose higher, 40 floors, 50, 55. It dominated the skyline now, visible from miles away. Newspapers were calling it the Cathedral of Commerce. Architectural journals praised its Gothic beauty. Frank Woolworth should have been triumphant. Instead, he was barely sleeping. He would arrive at the construction site at dawn, having not slept at all, and demand to see the previous day's progress. He carried a notebook where he recorded every defect. Mortar joints that were not perfectly smooth, stone carvings that did not match his specifications exactly. He was building the most expensive privately owned building in the world, and he could not stop seeing flaws. Gilbert tried to reason with him. Buildings had tolerances. Materials behaved in specific ways. Perfection was not a realistic standard. Frank stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I am paying in cash," Frank said. "Every penny. That means it will be perfect." The logic made no sense, but Gilbert was learning that logic was not the operating principle anymore. Frank Woolworth was not building a skyscraper. He was building proof. Proof that he was not the stammering boy the merchants rejected. Proof that he deserved respect. Proof that the wound inside him could be healed with marble and bronze and Gothic arches. The building could not heal him. But Frank had invested too much to accept that possibility. By the summer of 1912, the tower was nearly complete. 60 stories, 792 feet tall. The tallest building in the world. Gilbert had created something genuinely magnificent. The terracotta facade glowed golden in certain light. The lobby was a masterpiece of vaulted ceilings and marble columns. The building was everything Frank Woolworth asked for. It was not enough. Frank started planning the next tower, even taller, even more expensive. He bought land near the existing building. He sketched designs for a 70-story structure that would dwarf his cathedral. Gilbert listened to these plans and realized he was watching a man who would never stop building, because stopping meant facing the thing he was running from. The opening was scheduled for April of 1913. Frank Woolworth was 60 years old. He had spent $13.5 million in cash to build a monument that would force respect from people who would never give it. And standing in the half-finished lobby, surrounded by marble and bronze, looking up at the vaulted ceiling, he felt exactly as empty as the day that first merchant told him he lacked the intelligence for commerce. The building was almost finished. Frank Woolworth's collapse had just begun. Chapter 6. The Man Who Could Not Stop Building. By 1912, the tower was nearly finished, and Frank Woolworth had started planning the next one. The blueprints covered his desk, a 70-story tower, taller than the cathedral, more Gothic ornament, more marble, more bronze, more proof. He had purchased 2 lots adjacent to the Woolworth building. The new tower would rise from the same block, connected by sky bridges, creating a vertical city of commerce and validation. Cass Gilbert reviewed the plans with exhausted patience. "The current building is not even open yet," Gilbert said. Frank did not look up from the drawings. "This one will be better." Better meant taller. Better meant more expensive. Better meant something that would finally, definitively prove that Frank Woolworth deserved to exist in rooms with men who owned railroads. The arithmetic was simple. The Woolworth building would be the tallest in the world. But eventually something taller would be built. And when that happened, the respect the building commanded would evaporate, unless he built the next one first. The logic was airtight and insane. Frank's family was beginning to notice. His wife Jenny had learned to navigate his moods, but this was different. He was barely present. He would sit at dinner and say nothing for an hour, moving food around his plate, his jaw working like he was chewing on thoughts too difficult to swallow. His daughters tried to engage him. He would look at them with an expression that suggested he had forgotten who they were. At night, he paced. Jenny could hear him walking from room to room in their Fifth Avenue mansion. The same pattern every night: bedroom to library, library to drawing room to the conservatory, then back, over and over until dawn. She asked what was wrong. "My teeth," he said. The dental paranoia had become total. He was convinced the pain in his jaw was spreading poison through his entire system. His dentist had pulled 6 healthy teeth in the past year. Frank insisted on more. The dentist refused. Frank found a new dentist who was more accommodating. By early 1913, Frank Woolworth had lost 14 teeth. The pain did not stop, because the pain was not coming from his teeth. March of 1913. The Woolworth building was complete. The opening ceremony was scheduled for April 24th. President Wilson himself would participate, pressing a button in Washington that would illuminate 80,000 light bulbs in Lower Manhattan. It would be the most spectacular building opening in American history. Frank could not enjoy any of it. He toured the finished building with Gilbert and found defects everywhere. The marble in the lobby was beautiful, but the veining was inconsistent. The bronze elevator doors were masterpieces of metalwork, but the etching was slightly asymmetrical. The vaulted ceiling was magnificent, but the acoustics were wrong. His voice echoed in a way that suggested the space was mocking him. Gilbert tried to explain that these were not defects. They were the natural variations that occurred in handcrafted materials. The building was not mass-produced. It was made by human hands, and human hands left traces. Frank did not want traces. He wanted perfection. He moved into his office on the 24th floor 2 weeks before the opening. The office was absurd in its luxury. Walls paneled in wood from Napoleon's palace. A fireplace modeled after one in the Palace of Versailles. Custom furniture, Persian rugs, a private bathroom with gold fixtures. Everything designed to announce that the man who occupied this space deserved to be taken seriously. Frank sat at his enormous desk and felt nothing. The view from the 24th floor was extraordinary. You could see the entire city, the harbor, the bridges. On clear days, you could see 40 miles. Frank stared out the window and saw only the next building. The 70-story tower he would build, the one that would be even taller, even more proof. His secretary noticed he was not reading his mail. Documents piled up. Business decisions went unmade. The empire he had built on nickels and dimes was running itself now, which was fortunate, because Frank was no longer capable of running it. He spent hours rearranging furniture in his office. The desk needed to face a different direction. The chairs needed to be positioned exactly right. The lighting needed adjustment. He brought in decorators, explained his vision, then fired them when they executed it. The office was redesigned 7 times in 3 weeks. Nothing felt right, because the problem was not the office. And the problem was that Frank Woolworth had finally built the thing that was supposed to heal him, and the wound was still there, bleeding underneath all the marble. The night before the opening ceremony, Frank did not sleep at all. He walked through the empty building, his footsteps echoing in the marble lobby. He rode the elevators to every floor. He touched the walls. He studied the Gothic details he had obsessed over. He stood in his office and looked at the city he could now look down on. And he felt exactly like the stammering boy the merchants would not hire. April 24th, 1913. President Wilson pressed the button in Washington. 80,000 light bulbs blazed to life. The Woolworth building glowed like a golden cathedral against the night sky. Crowds gathered on the streets below, necks craned upward, in mouths open in awe. Newspapers called it the 8th wonder of the world. Architectural journals praised its Gothic grandeur. Business leaders hailed it as the triumph of American commerce. Frank Woolworth stood in his office on the 24th floor, surrounded by luxury, looking down on the crowds, and realized something terrible. He had spent $13.5 million to prove he deserved respect, and the men who mattered still would not give it. The building changed nothing. He was still the shopkeeper who made his fortune on nickels, still the boy who stammered, still the man whose teeth were poisoning him from the inside. The tower did not heal the wound. It just gave him a better view of how deep it went. The opening ceremony lasted 4 hours. Frank attended for 30 minutes, then retreated to his office. He would spend the rest of his life trying to leave. Chapter 7. The Throne He Could Not Leave. Frank Woolworth moved into his marble office on the 24th floor and slowly began to disappear. The retreat was gradual at first. He stopped attending society dinners, then board meetings, then family gatherings. His secretary would arrive each morning to find him already at his desk, staring out the window, often still wearing the same clothes from the previous day. He had the office redesigned again and again and again. By the end of 1913, the office had been reconfigured 12 times. Furniture moved, walls repainted, lighting changed. Frank could not explain what was wrong. He just knew something was not right. The space did not feel the way it was supposed to feel. And what it was supposed to feel like was validation. The office was designed to announce his importance. Wood from Napoleon's palace, marble from the same quarries that supplied European cathedrals, custom everything. But sitting in that space, Frank did not feel important. He felt trapped. The Gothic cathedral he built to force respect had become a beautiful prison. His dental obsession reached crisis levels. The pain in his jaw was constant now. He was convinced the remaining teeth were leaking poison into his bloodstream. He had his private dentist visit the office 3 times a week. More teeth were pulled. The dentist kept insisting there was nothing wrong. Frank kept insisting there was. By 1914, he had lost 22 teeth. His face began to collapse inward. His speech developed a lisp. Eating became difficult. But the pain did not stop because the pain was never about teeth. Jenny visited the office occasionally, trying to coax him home. Frank would promise to come to dinner and then not appear. He would call at midnight to say he was working late. Working late meant sitting at his desk, staring at blueprints for the 70-story tower he would never build, convinced that if he could just make it taller, more perfect, more undeniable, then the respect would come. His daughter stopped trying. They had grown up watching their father chase something he could never catch. They understood, in the way children of obsessed men understand, that his absence was not personal. He was not avoiding them specifically. He was avoiding everything that was not the wound. The business began to suffer in small ways. Competitors were innovating. Department stores were offering new services, credit, delivery, wider selection. The 5 and dime model that made Frank Woolworth rich was becoming outdated. His executives brought him proposals for modernization. Frank rejected them all. The formula works, he would say. The formula did work. But the world was changing. Shopgirls were organizing more effectively. Labor laws were being passed. Minimum wage legislation was being debated. The arithmetic that allowed Frank to extract $30 a week in profit per employee was being challenged by people who thought exploitation should be illegal. Frank saw this as a personal attack. He had built his empire on a simple principle: pay people the minimum required for survival and keep the difference. That was not exploitation. That was business. And if the business could generate enough profit to build the tallest building in the world, then the business was moral by definition. The reformers did not agree. By 1915, Frank was barely leaving his office. He had a private bathroom installed so he would not have to walk the halls. He had meals delivered. He slept on a leather couch when he slept at all. The marble office on the 24th floor had become his entire world. From his window, he could see the city growing, new buildings rising, technology advancing, the world moving forward while he sat still. He started having the office cleaned at night when he was not there. He could not stand having people in the space while he occupied it. He needed the solitude. Or maybe the solitude was all he could handle anymore. Other people required interaction. An interaction required the performance of normalcy, and Frank had used up all his ability to perform. The mirror in his private bathroom showed him what he was becoming: a 63-year-old man with a collapsing face, too thin, eyes that did not quite focus, a jaw that moved constantly, working over phantom pain. He looked like something haunting itself, which was accurate. Cass Gilbert visited in 1916 to discuss building maintenance. He had not seen Frank in over a year. The change was shocking. Frank had always been thin, but now he looked skeletal. His custom suits hung on him like they belonged to someone else. His hands trembled when he tried to hold blueprints. "Are you well?" Gilbert asked. "My teeth," Frank said. Gilbert looked at Frank's mouth and saw the truth. This was not about teeth. This had never been about teeth. But Frank had spent so many years running from the real pain that he had convinced himself the problem was something physical, something that could be pulled out, something that could be fixed with enough money and enough procedures. The real pain was simpler and unfixable. He had spent his entire life trying to prove he deserved to exist in rooms with important men. He had built the tallest building in the world. He had spent $13.5 million in cash. And the wound was still there, bleeding underneath all the marble, whispering that the merchants were right. You lack the intelligence for commerce. You are not good enough. You will never be good enough. By 1917, Frank rarely spoke at all. His secretary would ask questions and receive gestures in response. He communicated through notes written in shaking handwriting. His family staged an intervention. His personal physician insisted he needed rest. His wife begged him to come home. Frank refused to leave the office. The building had become his identity. Leaving meant admitting that the monument failed. That $13.5 million bought nothing but stone and steel. That the boy who stammered was still stammering inside the man who built a cathedral. He could not afford to admit that, so he stayed. And the marble office on the 24th floor became the place where Frank Woolworth would spend his final years, trapped inside the monument he built to prove he was free. Chapter 8. The Empire of Bargains begins to crack. While Frank hid in his tower, the retail world he invented was learning to survive without him. 1918. The war in Europe was ending. America was changing. Women who had worked in factories during wartime were not willing to go back to standing behind 5 and dime counters for $6 a week. Labor organizers who had been silenced were finding new platforms, and the competitors Frank dismissed were gaining ground. Kresge, Kress, McCrory, Newberry. All of them had copied the Woolworth model and then improved it. They offered employee benefits, shorter shifts, better wages, not out of generosity, because the labor market was tightening and women had options now. Frank's executives brought him reports. Market share was declining. Employee turnover was increasing. Stores in key cities were underperforming. Frank did not read the reports. He was in his office, redesigning the furniture layout again, convinced that if he could just arrange the space correctly, everything else would fall into place. The executives learned to make decisions without him. They modernized quietly. They raised wages in markets where they had to. They introduced new policies that Frank would have rejected if he had been paying attention. But Frank was not paying attention to the empire anymore. He was dying. The dental infections had progressed to sepsis. His immune system was compromised. He had lost so much weight that his clothes had to be altered monthly. His personal physician made house calls to the office, trying to treat a patient who refused to acknowledge he was sick. "It is my teeth," Frank would insist. The physician had stopped arguing. You could not reason with a dying man who had spent his entire life running from truth. The Woolworth building, meanwhile, stood magnificent and indifferent. Tourists visited to see the Cathedral of Commerce. Businesses rented office space. The building functioned exactly as designed. It just did not need Frank Woolworth anymore. That was the thing he could not accept. He had built the monument to prove his importance. But buildings do not care who builds them. They stand or fall based on engineering, not emotion. The Woolworth building would outlive Frank by decades, centuries probably, and every year it stood, his relevance would diminish a little more. He made one final attempt to assert control. In early 1919, Frank announced plans to sell the building, not because he needed money, but because he could not stand the thought of it outliving him. Better to sell it, take the profit, prove it was just a transaction, just business, not the desperate monument to validation it actually was. His family intervened. His lawyers intervened. The building was the crown jewel of his empire. Selling it would be financial insanity. Frank withdrew the plan, but the impulse revealed everything. He had built the tallest building in the world to prove he mattered. And now the building mattered more than he did. March of 1919. Frank stopped going to the office, not by choice. He physically could not. The sepsis had spread. He was bedridden in his Fifth Avenue mansion. His personal physician visited daily. The prognosis was clear, weeks at most. Frank asked to be taken to the Woolworth building one last time. His staff arranged it. They carried him on a stretcher. They brought him to the marble lobby, to the vaulted ceiling he had obsessed over, to the bronze elevator doors that were supposed to announce his importance. They rode the elevator to the 24th floor. Frank looked around his office. Wood from Napoleon's palace, marble from European quarries, custom furniture, Persian rugs, everything designed to prove he was someone who mattered. He asked to be taken home. The office felt like someone else's space, like a room designed by a man he used to be, a man who thought marble could heal wounds, a man who believed height was the same as worth. Frank knew better now, but the knowing came too late. April 8th, 1919, 3 in the morning. Frank Woolworth died in his bedroom. Sepsis, multiple organ failure, complications from dental procedures that should never have happened. He was 66 years old. The funeral was enormous. Thousands attended. Newspapers called him a titan of American commerce. Business leaders praised his vision. The Woolworth building was closed for the day as a mark of respect. None of it would have satisfied him, because Frank did not want to be respected after he died. He wanted to be respected while he lived. He wanted the men who dismissed him to acknowledge they were wrong. He wanted to walk into rooms and feel like he belonged there. He built the tallest building in the world to make that happen, and it changed nothing. The wound that drove him was older than his wealth, deeper than architecture. It was the wound of a 15-year-old boy being told he lacked intelligence, the wound of a man who made millions but could never make the merchants take it back. That wound stayed open until the moment his heart stopped. And then Frank Woolworth was gone, and the building remained, beautiful, indifferent, a 792-foot monument to a man who could not be healed by stone. Chapter 9. The Cathedral Becomes a Crypt. On April 8, 1919, Frank Woolworth died in his Fifth Avenue mansion, never having escaped the building's shadow. The death certificate listed sepsis as the cause. complications from dental procedures. But everyone close to Frank understood the real cause. He had spent 6 years trapped inside a monument that was supposed to heal him, and when it failed, he had nowhere left to run. The funeral was held at the Church of the Transfiguration. Thousands attended. Mourners lined the streets outside. The Woolworth building was draped in black bunting. All 5 and dime stores closed for the day. The newspapers ran tributes, calling Frank Woolworth a self-made titan, a pioneer of American retail, a visionary who changed commerce forever. None of the tributes mentioned the 60,000 shopgirls. None mentioned the $6 weekly wages, or the 60-hour shifts, or the arithmetic that extracted $30 in profit from women who could barely afford to eat. The official story was simpler. Frank Woolworth built an empire through hard work and innovation. He democratized consumer goods. He gave ordinary people access to items they could not otherwise afford. The story was true and incomplete because Frank did democratize consumer goods, but he did it by extracting value from desperate women and calling it opportunity. He did give ordinary people access to cheap merchandise, but the merchandise was only cheap because the labor was cheaper. The empire would continue without him. That was the strange part. Within a week of his death, the board of directors appointed new leadership. The stores kept operating. The building kept generating rental income. The Woolworth Corporation was larger than the man who founded it now. It had become a system that functioned independently of its creator. Frank would have hated that. He built the empire to prove his importance. But systems do not care about importance. They care about function. And the Woolworth system functioned perfectly well without Frank Woolworth. His estate was valued at $27 million. Enormous wealth for the time. His wife Jenny inherited the Fifth Avenue mansion and enough money to maintain her lifestyle indefinitely. His daughters received trust funds that made them independently wealthy. None of them wanted the Woolworth building. That was telling. The monument that consumed Frank's final years held no appeal for his family. They understood what he never could. The building was not a home or a legacy. It was a symptom, evidence of a wound that never healed. The building was sold within 2 years of his death, sold to investors who saw it as commercial real estate, just another property, just another income stream. The emotional significance that Frank poured into every marble detail meant nothing to the new owners. They cared about rental rates and maintenance costs and return on investment. The transformation was immediate. Frank's private office on the 24th floor was divided into smaller offices and rented out. The wood from Napoleon's palace was covered with modern paneling. The fireplace modeled after Versailles was sealed. All the custom furniture was removed and replaced with standard commercial equipment. The space that Frank spent 6 years redesigning obsessively became generic office space within months of his death. That erasure would have destroyed him. He had built the office to be permanent proof of his importance. He had spent a fortune on materials that were supposed to outlast generations. But permanence is not the same as relevance. The materials lasted. The meaning evaporated. By 1921, almost nothing remained of Frank Woolworth's presence in the building. The lobby still featured plaques with his name. The architecture still reflected his Gothic obsessions. But the building had moved on. It was no longer the Cathedral of Commerce. It was just a very tall office building in Lower Manhattan. The retail empire moved on too. Labor laws that Frank fought against were passed. Minimum wage requirements, maximum hour restrictions, mandatory break periods. The arithmetic that made his fortune possible became illegal. The Woolworth Corporation adapted. They raised wages, they reduced shifts, they improved conditions. Not because the new leadership was more moral than Frank, because the world had changed and the old model no longer worked. The shopgirls who funded Frank's monument finally got chairs. That victory came too late for Sadie Frown and the 60,000 women who stood for 60 hours a week, earning $6. But their suffering was not meaningless. The reforms happened because people saw the cost of the old system and decided it was too high. Frank Woolworth would have called that socialism, but Frank was gone, and the world did not wait for his approval. By 1925, the Woolworth building was just another skyscraper. Newer buildings were approaching its height. Architectural styles were changing. The Gothic revival that seemed so magnificent in 1913 looked dated now. Fashions had moved on. The building had not. And that was the ultimate irony. Frank Woolworth built permanence. He built something that would outlast him by generations. He succeeded. But the permanence he built was architectural, not emotional. The building stood. The man was forgotten. And the monument that was supposed to force respect became just another piece of the skyline. Tall, beautiful, empty. A cathedral to a god no one remembered. Chapter 10. When the tallest building was no longer tall. For 17 years, the Woolworth building was the tallest in the world, and then it was just another tower. April 11th, 1930. The Chrysler building officially opened at 1,046 feet, 7 stories taller than the Woolworth building. The title of world's tallest transferred to a new monument, a new ego, a new man who needed to prove something by building higher than everyone else. Frank Woolworth had been dead for 11 years. His cathedral lost its crown, and the world barely noticed. The newspapers mentioned it. Architectural journals noted the change. But there was no ceremony for being surpassed. No moment of recognition that the thing Frank spent $13.5 million to achieve had an expiration date. The Woolworth building just became the second tallest building in the world, then the third, then the 10th, then one tower among many. The Depression changed everything. Buildings that had been symbols of prosperity became symbols of excess, empty office space, bankrupt tenants. The Woolworth building weathered the economic collapse better than most. Its location was good, its construction was solid, but it was no longer special. Special required being taller than everything else. Special required forcing people to look up. And by 1935, there were a dozen buildings tall enough to make looking up feel ordinary. The transformation from monument to commodity happened gradually. The Gothic details that seemed so magnificent in 1913 started to look old-fashioned. The vaulted lobby was still beautiful, but beauty was no longer enough. Tenants wanted modern amenities, air conditioning, updated elevators, flexible floor plans. The Woolworth building had none of that. It had marble and bronze and wood from Napoleon's palace. It had craftsmanship that would never be replicated. But craftsmanship did not pay rent. And by the 1940s, the building was struggling to fill its office space. There were discussions about demolition, not serious discussions. The building was too well constructed to demolish cheaply. Yes, and there was still prestige in the address. But the fact that demolition was even mentioned revealed how far the building had fallen. From world's tallest to demolition candidate in 30 years. The retail empire faded too. The Woolworth Corporation survived. It adapted, it changed. But the five and dime model that made Frank rich was dying. Supermarkets offered better prices. Department stores offered better selection. Shopping malls offered better experiences. By 1950, the red and gold Woolworth sign was becoming nostalgic, a reminder of an earlier era. The stores still existed, but they felt like relics. The last original Woolworth store closed in 1997, 118 years after Frank opened his first 5-cent store in Lancaster. The model that built his fortune finally became unsustainable. The arithmetic of cheap goods sold in volume was replaced by cheaper goods sold in larger volume by companies with better supply chains. Walmart, Target, Dollar General, they were all descendants of Frank Woolworth's innovation. They just did it more efficiently. The Woolworth building outlasted the business that paid for it. That was not how Frank planned it. He built the tower as a monument to his retail empire. The building was supposed to symbolize the permanence of his success. Instead, it symbolized the opposite. Empires fall, businesses fail, buildings remain. By 2000, the Woolworth building was protected as a historic landmark. That designation meant it could not be demolished. But it also meant it could not be significantly altered. The building was frozen in time, in a Gothic cathedral in a city that had moved on from Gothic cathedrals. The irony was perfect. Frank built permanence to prove his importance, and permanence trapped the building in irrelevance. It stood as a monument to a business model that was illegal, a retail empire that no longer existed, and a man almost no one remembered. Tourists still photographed it. Architecture students still studied it. But the crowds who gathered on opening night in 1913 to see 80,000 light bulbs blaze to life were gone. The sense of wonder was gone. What remained was a very tall, very beautiful building that no longer served the purpose it was built for. The shopgirls who funded it were gone too. All of them. Sadie Frown and 60,000 women like her. They stood for 60 hours. They earned $6 a week. They generated the profit that paid for marble lobbies and bronze elevator doors. And then they died. And no one built monuments to them. The labor reforms they fought for became law. The chairs they wanted became mandatory. The 8-hour day became standard. But their names were not carved in stone. Their suffering was not commemorated. Frank Woolworth got a 792-foot cathedral with his name on it. The women who paid for it got nothing. That disparity was the real legacy of the Woolworth building. Not the architecture, not the engineering, but the arithmetic. The cold calculation that human labor could be converted into profit, and profit could be converted into monuments, and monuments could purchase immortality. Frank was wrong about the immortality part. By 2010, almost no one under 50 knew who Frank Woolworth was. They knew the building. They did not know the man. The monument outlived its meaning. And standing in Lower Manhattan, tall and Gothic and indifferent, the Woolworth building waited for its next transformation. Chapter 11. The Conversion. No one imagined. In 2015, developers announced they would transform Woolworth's Cathedral of Commerce into 33 luxury condominiums. The news was met with outrage and inevitability. Preservationists argued that converting a historic office building into residences violated its architectural integrity. Developers argued that the alternative was letting the building decay. The developers won, because the building needed a purpose, and office space was no longer enough. The Woolworth building had become too expensive to maintain as pure commercial real estate. The Gothic details required constant restoration. The marble needed specialized care. The bronze needed polishing. The building demanded money. Luxury residences could provide that money. The conversion took 5 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The lower floors remained office space. The upper 30 floors were gutted and rebuilt as condominiums. Each unit was designed to preserve the Gothic exterior while creating modern luxury inside. The irony was overwhelming. Frank Woolworth built his cathedral by extracting profit from people who could barely afford hairpins. He sold necessities to the poor and used their desperation to fund his monument. And now that monument was being converted into homes for billionaires. The cheapest unit was listed at $4 million. The most expensive was the penthouse. 5 floors at the top of the tower. 58 stories up. 30,000 square feet of living space with 360-degree views of New York. It sold for $110 million. $110 million for a home in a building paid for by women earning $6 a week. The arithmetic was obscene. The penthouse cost more than Frank spent building the entire structure. One residence, one buyer, one transaction worth more than $13.5 million in cash. The buyer was anonymous. Of course they were. People who spend $110 million on apartments value privacy. But the sale made headlines. Most expensive home sale in New York history at the time. The Woolworth building was news again, not for its architecture, for its price tag. The conversion changed everything about the building's relationship to the city. When it was an office building, the lobby was public. Anyone could walk in. Tourists came to see the vaulted ceilings and the marble columns and the Gothic details. The building was accessible. Now it was gated, private, reserved for people who could afford $4 million entry fees. Frank Woolworth wanted to build something that forced respect. He succeeded. But the respect was not for him. It was for money itself. The building became a monument to the thing that paid for it, not the man, not the business, just the pure abstraction of wealth. The shopgirls would have found that fitting. They understood better than anyone that Frank's empire was not built on vision or innovation. It was built on arithmetic, the gap between what they earned and what their labor generated. The conversion just made the arithmetic more explicit. $110 million, 60,000 shopgirls earning $6 a week for 7 years equals $12,600,000. The penthouse cost almost 10 times what the women's labor was worth. The building had come full circle, from monument to commodity to luxury good, from proof of importance to expensive real estate. The Gothic details remained. The terracotta facade still glowed golden in afternoon light. The vaulted ceiling still soared. The architecture was unchanged, but the meaning had inverted completely. Frank built a cathedral to commerce, a celebration of the 5 and dime model, a monument to the idea that anyone could buy a hairpin for a nickel. Now the building celebrated the opposite: exclusivity, luxury, the idea that some people could spend $110 million on an apartment while most people could not afford the maintenance fees. The conversion preserved the building. That was important. The Woolworth building was genuinely magnificent. Its architecture deserved to survive. But preservation came at the cost of purpose. The building was no longer what it was built to be. It was something else now, something Frank would not recognize. A vertical gated community, a tower for people who needed to live above everyone else. Literally above. 58 stories up. Looking down. Frank would have understood that impulse. He spent his life looking down from the 24th floor, convinced that height proved worth. But he would have hated seeing his monument become exactly what the old money men who rejected him represented: exclusive, inaccessible, reserved for people born into wealth. The boy who could not get hired to sweep floors built a building that now only billionaires could enter. That transformation revealed something true about monuments. They do not preserve the builder's intentions. They survive by adapting to whoever has money. Frank's cathedral adapted. It survived. And in surviving, it became the opposite of everything he built it to be: a monument to the people who would never have shaken his hand. Chapter 12. The monument that outlived its meaning. The Woolworth building still stands in Lower Manhattan, beautiful and indifferent, a cathedral to a god no one remembers. Walk past it today and you will see tourists photographing the Gothic facade. They admire the terracotta details. They crane their necks to see the top. They take selfies in front of the entrance. Ask them who Frank Woolworth was, and most will not know. They know it is a famous building. They know it is old and beautiful. They do not know about the 60,000 shopgirls or the $6 weekly wages, or the man who died, convinced his teeth were poisoning him. They do not know about the $13.5 million paid in cash, or the obsessive redesigning, or the wound that architecture could not heal. They know it is expensive to live there now. That is all the building means anymore: height and beauty and exclusivity. The history condensed to aesthetic, in the suffering erased. The complicated truth about how monuments get built replaced with clean lines and golden light. This is what happens to all monuments eventually. They outlive their context. The reasons they were built fade. The emotions that drove their creation become incomprehensible. What remains is the physical object, stripped of meaning, available for new interpretations. The Woolworth building was supposed to force respect. Now it forces nothing. It simply exists. 79 stories, 792 feet. Gothic Revival architecture applied to steel frame construction. A synthesis of medieval aesthetics and modern engineering. Historically significant, architecturally important, beautiful, empty of the meaning Frank poured into it. Because meaning requires memory, and memory requires context, and context requires someone to care why the thing was built. The tourists do not care. The residents do not care. The building exists outside of its own story now. That would have destroyed Frank. He built permanence specifically to avoid being forgotten. He spent his fortune creating something too big to ignore. He put his name in stone letters 10 feet tall. He designed every detail to announce his importance. And the world forgot him anyway. Not completely. Historians know who he was. Architecture students study the building. Business schools teach case studies about the 5 and dime model. His name exists in textbooks, but he is not remembered the way he wanted to be remembered. Not as someone who mattered, not as someone who deserved respect, just as someone who built a tall building. The monument succeeded. The man failed. That distinction was always the problem. Frank thought they were the same thing. He thought building something magnificent would make him magnificent. He thought height was the same as worth. He was wrong. Buildings are buildings. People are people. And no amount of marble can bridge that gap. Stand in the lobby today and look up at the vaulted ceiling Frank obsessed over. It is genuinely beautiful. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The acoustic tiles create a sound quality that modern construction cannot replicate. The space feels sacred in a way that has nothing to do with religion. Frank created something lasting. But what did he create it for? to prove the merchants wrong, to force respect from people who dismissed him, to heal a wound inflicted when he was 15 years old and too shy to speak to customers. Did it work? No. The merchants were dead before the building was finished. The people Frank wanted respect from never gave it. The wound stayed open until sepsis killed him. The building stands. The wound is gone, because wounds die with the people who carry them. That is the final irony of the Woolworth building. It is a monument to a pain that no longer exists. A 792-foot-tall answer to a question no one is asking anymore. Who was Frank Woolworth and why did he matter? The building cannot answer that. Buildings cannot answer anything. They can only stand and wait and slowly transform into whatever the next generation needs them to be. For Frank, the building was proof of worth. For the shopgirls, it was proof of exploitation. For the developers, it was a conversion opportunity. For the billionaire in the penthouse, it is just a very expensive home with good views. All of those meanings are true. None of them are complete. Because the Woolworth building is not one thing. It is a Gothic revival skyscraper, and a labor monument, and a historic landmark, and a luxury residence, and a tourist attraction, and a case study in architectural preservation, and a reminder that monuments outlive the systems that created them. It contains all of those meanings and refuses to settle on just one. Maybe that is the real legacy, not what Frank intended, not what anyone intended, just the stubborn fact of existence. The building stands because it was built well. It survives because people keep finding reasons to preserve it. And it will keep standing long after everyone who cares about Frank Woolworth is gone. 100 years from now, the building will still be there. The Gothic details will still glow golden in afternoon light. The vaulted ceilings will still soar. And no one will remember the boy who could not get a job sweeping floors, or the merchant who told him he lacked intelligence, or the 60,000 shopgirls who stood for 60 hours earning $6, or the $13.5 million paid in cash, or the marble office on the 24th floor where a man slowly disappeared. All of that will be gone. What will remain is the building, beautiful and indifferent, a cathedral to a God no one remembers. And maybe that is enough, not for Frank. He needed more. He needed validation and respect and proof that his life meant something. But buildings do not care what we need. They stand or fall based on engineering. They survive or crumble based on maintenance. They mean whatever we decide they mean until we stop deciding. The Woolworth building has outlived its meaning. And in doing so, it has become something stranger and more honest than the monument Frank intended. A reminder that no amount of marble can fill an emotional void. That height is not the same as worth. That monuments outlive the wounds that created them. That sometimes the most permanent things we build are the least personal. And that beauty, in the end, is its own justification. The building stands. That is all it was ever gonna do.